Hi, I'm Michael Smith for Nevada Trails. So I have a very special show. I have Garry Bowen, who is a sustainability consultant. And one thing we're going to talk about is the triple bottom line. And one thing that's kind of happening in this region is I know South Lake Tahoe just hired a person on their board, I guess, to be exclusively involved with sustainability. I've talked to the town manager of Gardnerville, and they're really into sustainability. And it seems to be the buzzword of geotourism, sustainability, and you've been involved with this for many, many years. So maybe you could give your take on sustainability, because this is your second show with us, and it seems like what I see and hear is not what sustainability actually is. So right now we have the triple bottom line on the screen, and maybe you could bring it forward to tell us what your feeling is.
Well, yeah, and thank you for having me, first of all, once again. And before we deal with this particular slide, because this one is actually known as Beyond the Triple Bottom Line,
okay,
I will address the fact that it is becoming, in fact, known as a buzzword, because it's still kind of misunderstood in the public, because everybody seems to be wanting to adopt it without a full understanding of it. So these, I presume these efforts are to help them understand what it really is versus what they might be sensing that it is. So whether it's Gardnerville or South Lake Tahoe or almost any community in the country now is kind of working in that direction, because we all want to reduce global warming, we all want to reduce emissions, but we don't know quite how to go about it, and we don't know what framework might work to understand. And the slide that we have up here is technically called Beyond the Triple Bottom Line, and starting there, the issue is, for example, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and the Sierra Business Council in Truckee like to use the triple bottom line as a framework.
Okay.
Unfortunately, in global sustainability terms, it's not really complete, because of the three that we have here, the environment, the economy, and society, they actually need to be, should be really a fourth one, in that they should be embedded in nature. And that's usually what's missing in a lot of sustainability discussions. It's easy to cut and paste a lot of things about that you might like to have for your community gardens, or nicer streets, or better landscaping, or better water flow, all those kinds of things. But without the correct anchor of a framework, nature is really the issue. We need to get in alignment with what the world needs to function, because that's why it's become dysfunctional, because of what humans have done.
So essentially you're talking about that we're taking too much from the earth, we need to be not taking so much and replenishing what we take, type thing?
Yeah, unless we get in tune with what nature needs to replenish itself, if we step over those boundaries, then obviously if nature has difficulty replenishing itself, which it's been doing for millions of years, then obviously we're going to create a problem for not only the world around us, but for ourselves, because nature is what nurtures us. And we haven't, over the centuries, over the eons, we kind of somehow forgot that, and all the things we've been successful at.
Well, I know my grandparents both owned farms, so our sustainability was our little town and a little farm, and during the Great Depression they took care of a lot of people. But now as the world has expanded, we're all kind of locked into needing other people to survive, other resources to survive. I've lived in St. Petersburg or Host Beach, Delaware, both tourist towns that need other people to come and visit for us to survive. You have 3 or 4 months to live a year. And now that I'm in the Tahoe area and Gardnerville and Carson City, if you don't save up your walnuts for when you're hungry, you're going to be in trouble. So sustainability is a very big issue, and I think it's a very important topic for this region, because the environment of the state and this region is changing.
Well, and I'm going to add a time element to it, because when you mention farming communities, it's known that man has gone through various and assorted different phases, caveman to hunter-gatherers to the agricultural society. But in this case, all the cues are there for what was good about all of those. But as we move from one to the next, we kind of forget what was good about the one before. So when I add a time element, it's because, for example, daylight savings time was originally to expand the workday for farmers, because make hay while the sun shines. Okay,
makes sense.
If you only have from May or from June to September or October to get everything done that you need to get to provide your products to the municipalities down the road or the urban areas down the road who don't grow their own things as much, then time becomes an important issue. But more than that, it's how we use the time and how we use the world around us that we need to pay a lot more attention to, and that's technically what sustainability is really about. I would like to comment real quickly and then go back to the slide. I get asked once in a while, what's the difference between environmentalists and sustainability?
Exactly.
Well, my simple answer for that, after observing a lot of the political ins and outs, Tahoe Basin, League to Save Lake Tahoe, the symbiotic relationship between those two, for example, environmentalists basically, and I'm talking about ism versus the environment. The environment is where we are, but environmentalism, basically, they find something to mobilize themselves to be against and therefore be confrontational with it, whereas sustainability, and then mobilize all the resources from that point forward until they find something new to be against. Sustainability is more about finding things that need to be done to get us in alignment and then just working as quietly or as whatever necessary to move in the direction to get us in alignment. Mm-hmm. As opposed to being confrontational. But it also seems to have adopted the idea that anybody can use the term and everybody can slap it on whatever they think sustainability is, but there's actually some very well set parameters and frameworks that guide directions. And I would say that the work that I did in Whistler a number of years ago is probably as good an example, because once people understand what the overall issues are on a broader level, they can translate that into, it's very easy to translate that into their regular way of doing things. The choices you pick and what you purchase because of what's in it, that doesn't affect the food chain, it doesn't affect, that may reduce your use of pharmaceuticals down the road, the same pharmaceuticals that are getting into the food chain on a molecular level, those kinds of things come only after you understand the broad aspects of what we're trying to work against, which is in more conflict with the world. We can't be in conflict with the same system that serves us. Mm-hmm.
Well, could you go back a little bit and explain what your experience with the Whistler?
Well, Whistler basically, and some of this I filled in afterward, but Whistler was originally master planned as a meandering stream. Therefore, they're already in a function when they designed it, the town as a walkable, livable community on levels that most urban environments don't. That goes back to about 1965. It was actually inspired by the Olympics in Squaw Valley, because once they saw what Mr. Cushing had done within 5 years of getting an Olympics, they actually master planned it with the idea that they wanted to have one in the future. Having said that, around 2000, shortly before, it ramps up always, but in the latter part of 2000, they had back-to-back sustainability conferences on a global level. There were people like the Executive Vice President of McDonald's, Executive Vice President of Fairmont Hotels, people of that caliber as a sustainability conference. Having done that, they basically have about a third of the population of South Lake Tahoe, for example, 9,500 versus roughly 30,000. And they have Whistler, Blackcomb is one of the premier ski areas in the world, obviously prime for a Winter Olympics. So they basically, the community was really concerned about roughly half to 750,000 people pouncing on their little village for a period of three weeks. So they looked into establishing sustainability to fend off some of that pressure, and what might they be left with after that.
Well, I heard back in those days they were hiring the best planners in the world.
Yeah, and that's true also not only of Whistler. I use that as a comparison to mountain environment and the ski environment more of Tahoe, but in the urban environment of Vancouver, that's typically one of the top 5 cities in the world to live. So they did equal things when you think of this ice hockey and this ice skating rinks that were in Vancouver versus the mountains proper. Everything was done first class there. But more to the point, in answer to your question, in the latter part of 2000, there was a major effort put forth which was started to be implemented in Whistler. 7 years later, this allows me to take myself out of the equation in terms of ego or my part or whatever. It's not really about me. Sustainability is not about anybody. It's about all of us.
I agree.
Having said that, 7 years after that, in 2007, Whistler received a United Nations Sustainable Global Village Award. And it was for the simple fact, I think it's a simple fact, that the community picked up the ball and ran with it. And having done that in that 7-year span, they have done a well enough job across the whole level of citizenry in and around Whistler that they were recognized with a global recognition from the United Nations for what they had done. Having said that, that formed a model of its own, which is now known in Canada as the Whistler model, and it's now being implemented in hundreds of communities across Canada based on, number one, what was started in 2000, number two, what they got recognized for 7 years later, which ironically was about 3 years before the Olympics started. So I guess they were successful in establishing the bulwark against all of those people pouncing on their little village. Because they wanted to retain some of the character of it, even while they wanted to share with the world, all the visitors, various languages and so forth, what they had done and why they had done it. Why do we care about our watersheds? Why do we care about the soil? Why do we care about whether there's so many of you that we want to help you not trounce our little village? All of those things are incumbent in sustainability, and I guess they were pretty successful at it. And I've been monitoring it on that level for the simple fact that I wanted to use a model like that more in my home territory, which happens to be Lake Tahoe. So that's what I've been observing. And the issue with the slide that we had earlier, triple bottom line, the Sierra Business Council and TRPA kind of use that as their guideline, but actually it needs to have the element of nature incorporated in it so that it connects directly with the watersheds, with the forests, with the flora and fauna life that goes on up there. Then that can be shared with the visitor base on the level that Whistler has done, because we get probably yearly, we probably get as many visitors as does a place like Whistler, because we have a lot of they don't have a lake, but they have a lot of therefore they may not have as much like kayaking and things like that, but they certainly have mountain biking experiences, they certainly have skiing in the winter, certainly hiking, certainly majestic scenery. So there's a lot of similarities between the two. Even though Tahoe is technically bigger, it's a little further behind in what was established a decade ago in British Columbia.
Well, you grew up in Tahoe. If you just got the job of being the sustainable person for the board, what would you do?
Well, Tahoe is a unique situation in the sense that my earliest experience was working for Bill Harrah, and in this case, when I left, I was in public relations, so I'd like to think I understand the economy of the gaming industry that has prevailed in South Lake Tahoe, but they're going to need to change themselves not only for the 21st century, but for what the rest of the world is going to have to move along to in sustainable terms, because unless we understand the forces that are at play that cause as much damage to our surroundings as it does, then we're not going to change on levels that we're going to need to be competitive in the 21st century, even on an economic level.
Well, we're going to take a short break and watch a couple PSAs, and we come back with Garry Bowen's going to talk a little bit more about sustainability. Thank you.
If erosion from my land goes into the lake, it won't be the gem, the wonderful thing that it is now.
Everybody is making a contribution to the decline in water quality unless they actually use best management practices.
I feel privileged to be able to live here, and this way we will all contribute to the clarity of the lake.
Hi, I'm Fish and Game Warden Patrick Foy. Boaters at Lake Tahoe should expect watercraft inspections at all launch sites around the lake. These inspections are designed to prevent the destructive spread of zebra and quagga mussels, as well as other aquatic invasive species. If brought into Lake Tahoe, invasive species will damage boats and the pristine waters and be impossible to remove. Remember to clean, drain, and dry your boat every time before entering a new body of water. Clean boats stop aquatic hitchhikers.
Hi, we're back with Garry Bowen, the sustainability consultant, and essentially, what are the kind of projects that are happening now that you're involved with? You mentioned something about composting and gardens, and it sounds exciting.
Well, thank you. We hope that it's exciting. It's taking a lot of work because something that doesn't exist at all before is really difficult to bring up to speed. But it's very important to do that for the simple fact that, and I'm going to get to that specific project in a second. But it's very important to do that because we need, particularly in this region, we need example of exactly what a totally sustainable project might look like. And there is a circular effect in sustainability. In other words, it's a systems approach, so it can't be segmented as much as the idea of holistic. And a total sustainability project would, by definition, be holistic. So the one that you're asking about actually is related to the city of South Lake Tahoe. They have a sustainability commission now, and they also have a sustainable action plan. One item of which is item number 9, which is known as healthy food systems. And as much as that particular segment was a little bit cut and paste, in other words, it kind of went all over the place in terms of what you could do with something like a healthy food system, the ones that I drew out of it were community gathering place, education, and year-round. And of course, the Tahoe Basin is rather challenging in that level. So before we get to answering the challenge, I'll just say where we started was a food waste diversion program with Embassy Suites, which is about 400 and some odd rooms. Next door is the Marriott, which has roughly 900 rooms between it. So starting with a base of about 1,300 rooms, plus Aramark, which runs Zephyr Cove Resort, and both paddle wheelers on the lake. We're creating a food waste diversion program so that if you think about coming from the end of town in South Lake Tahoe from the Y through state line to pick up a route of food waste, and the Embassy Suites right now does about 3.5 cubic yards of food waste a week. So that provides a great pilot project to have some substance in it to the get-go. Add the other 900 rooms plus Zephyr Cove plus the paddle wheelers, because our other two partners at one end are South Tahoe Refuse, the waste management company up there. They have graciously provided part of the pilot project, the routing of this. So if you think of coming from the Y, South Tahoe Resort, pick up at the Marriott's, at the Embassy Suites, go to Zephyr Cove, pick that up, and go right over the hill to our other partner at the other end, which is Full Circle Compost. Then we are creating large amounts of compost that didn't exist before from food waste that is otherwise goes to the landfill. So we reduce a lot of vehicle miles traveled, we reduce a lot of things going to the landfill, and we get some beneficial use out of creating compost from that, because the second phase would be, as we build up the volume there, the second phase would be to turn that around and take it back up to the lake in the form of not so much compost, but as a potting soil type of a garden soil.
Well, I think that's awesome. I've been doing a lot of gardening recently, and I think it sounds perfect. I'll be buying from a local products from, if I eat the food, and all of a sudden I'm buying it back for my garden.
And the thing that people, that I'll add right now is the fact that if we build a facility, and I'll get there in a second, but if we build a facility, it's pretty obvious that at 3.5 cubic yards or more, because that's just one place with that number, if we add some more, that if you multiply that out by 40, 50 weeks or whatever, that's a lot of volume. So we probably will be making more than what we can use in one garden facility. However, because I talked about making a holistic, totally sustainable project out of this, if we build a facility, what I'm working with is a solar-powered geodesic dome that would be large enough to satisfy what I mentioned earlier, community gathering place. We can institute educational programs because our kids don't understand where their food comes from. We also can work with the very simple translation of low value produce that we get being perched way high in the mountains, 200-300 miles away from most gardening sources. And most food loses a lot of nutritional energy in transport. So the closer it is to the market that it serves, the more nutritious it is, the more tasty it is. So we probably can help the restaurant industry at the same time, which all in turn helps the visitor.
That's buying locally, that's for
yeah,
sure.
and not to mention the residents in town all at the same time. So anybody that comes through Tahoe that wants to experience a little better food source for things, because the equation I started with earlier is that if we're low value by traveling so far, we also end up paying more for it because of the transport that comes there.
Exactly.
So essentially, that's an equation that maybe we can get much better value for the money we spend, even while we're doing sustainable things by reducing things going to the landfill, finding use for the nutritional value in the composting direction, and then bringing it back and creating something which otherwise does not exist there. But the civic engagement or community involvement parts of that are really, really interesting in a visitor-based community because people are flowing in and out long enough not to pay attention to things. So it takes a particularly concerted effort to put that out there in a form that people want to understand how beneficial it actually is to them and to the economy that's based on visitors coming through that want the best experience they possibly can. I recently gave a talk on these issues, community garden, and I actually titled it "The Energy You'll Need," for the simple fact that people don't really relate food as energy.
Well,
as much as I'm hungry, they don't necessarily relate it as energy, but for people that want to show up there and go hiking up towards Eagle Falls or up in Desolation Valley or kayaking on the lake at 6,000 foot altitude or higher, they absorb a lot of energy real quick. So the best nutritional value they can get out of what they manage to find around town to eat, whether it's a picnic or whether it's in their backpack or whether it's sitting down at a restaurant after a trying day of yachting or sailing or something, that's gonna be beneficial to their experiential part of their visit to Tahoe.
What you're saying is your product will have more beneficial nutrition because it's less transportation and then less wear and tear on the shipping part of it.
Well, and the other part of that would be in a community involvement side is that if there's a certain transport cost included in what the higher price that you pay, being at the altitude we are, we feel that we could probably retain some of the transport cost and then use that fund for things that go on in the community versus paying for the transport to bring it 200, 300 miles away. Rather keep that kind of funds in the town to do things that the town needs. Therefore, on many levels, I think you'd have to go back and count the levels there, but
well, education for kids alone, I'm just saying big time.
On many levels there, the more levels there are, the more sustainable it is, number one. Number two, there is one of the products, if you will, of sustainability is actually resonance. And resonance, in this case, it resonates outbound. The more things you have there based on one project, that's really what sustainability is, because it has what's known as solution multipliers in it, that the more things you do, the more benefit you receive. And that's something in the current society we haven't experienced as much yet, but it's quite exciting once you get engaged in it. And that's what drives me, because I've seen some of that excitement, but a lot of people have not yet. They'd rather do it the way they're used to doing it.
That's why I brought up Whistler, because they can look it up on their little computers, and this is something that's new, so they can see that's something that's been done before, and this is being just started.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and give them credit to the degree. There is a website called Whistler 2020, which obviously is 10 years after the Olympics, but it's called Whistler2020.ca. That's their suffix up there, standing for Canada. But on that one, they have a spectacular web page that has a circle thing, and if you click on any of the things, that gives you an idea of the 20 or so items that are going on in the community, which have full-blown community meeting participation. They have standing committees and at least 16 items of sustainability in and around a town that has less than 10,000 people in it.
Wow, that's exciting.
Which is an astounding number, relatively speaking. Then when you look at other sustainability issues, and bear with me, I'm trying to wedge in some things that might be of interest to the audience. For example, the city of Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon, 8% of the population now rides their bike to work, to and from, every day. And if I don't even know what the population of Portland is, but it's probably 400,000 or 500,000. I'm guessing. I haven't been there in years.
Big city, yeah.
Multiply that by 8%. That runs about 32 to 40,000 people a day are riding their bikes to work every day because of the facilities that were created for them to do that. And once you start stringing like beads all the little or really fortuitous projects like that between British Columbia and Oregon and some things in Tennessee and Florida, all across the nation, there are examples of things like that going on, which begin the shift to sustainability, because all of those things help the air quality, they help the water quality. They're better for you to get out and ride a bike than to sit dormant somewhere and not get active. And if you can easily adopt yourself by leaving at the appropriate time to make it to work on time by riding your bike. And now 40,000 people a day now enjoy doing that.
It's exciting.
So in this case, we'd like to see more of that in this area. And I know there's some good things going on at the RTC, for example, in reducing vehicle miles traveled. There still needs significant work in the Lake Tahoe Basin. But once they get on that path, I think their economy will recover to the level, maybe not of the 60s and 70s when the big entertainers were up there, but we may not need that level of traffic anyway to do what we need to do to perform well as a community. But we'll see. But at least it needs a project or two, maybe like the one and some other things going on, to begin to stimulate the idea that there is another way to think about doing things, and there is another way of doing it versus the way we've been doing it, which caused us to be where we are. Status quo.
Yeah. Well, you've done some exciting things. If people want to communicate with you, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, my email address is tahoefuture@gmail.com. I'm sorry, at gmail.com. No breaks, just two words pushed together, tahoefuture@gmail.com. And otherwise, I'd be happy to hear from people and answer questions about what we've been talking about or any other thing, because the world of sustainability is really exciting, and it may lead to taking this region into a realm, which is why we titled the program that way. Tahoe, because Lake Tahoe is so important to the economy in Northern California, think Reno Tahoe Airport, think Reno Tahoe Industrial Park. Because it's so important, it probably is closer to becoming a realm than it is a region, or at least it should be, given the majesty that we live with.
Well, Gary, we ran out of time. We're going to have to bring you back and probably create a whole new series for this type of subject because it's too important. Well, anyways, Gary, thank you for being on Nevada Trails.
And thank you for having me, and I hope I've given you some glimpse of what the future might hold if we start moving ourselves in another direction.
Well, I think you planted some very bright seeds. Hope you can track down for some of the things he's talked about and just get some. Thank you.